Noon or good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly digital transformation live stream, where we talk about all things related to digital transformation, including the people, process, technology, and strategy sides of change. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And today's topic that we're going to cover here today is lessons from complex digital transformations throughout the world. And I'll introduce our guest, Dean, here in just a moment. But before I introduce Dean, I wanted to cover a couple of logistical items. First of all, this is a weekly live stream that we do each week, same time, same place. We stream to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And this live discussion becomes part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast, which is released every Wednesday. So a week from tomorrow, you will find a new episode of that podcast called Transformation Ground Control that features this interview. Once it gets edited and polished and integrated with other content, we'll release that episode. So you're being part of the live production by being here on our live stream today. So thank you for being here. Secondly, we are going to take audience questions as we go through the discussion. I'm going to get us started with a few questions, but would love to hear questions and comments from the audience as we go through the conversation here today. So please drop in the chat any questions you have along the way. We'd love to get to your questions and thoughts and comments and make you part of the conversation as well. So thank you in advance for any questions you might have. And you can do that by just dropping in the chat on whatever platform you're watching on here today. Just drop in the chat whatever questions or comments you have, and we will get to those. We see the stream, or we see the chat as we are live here today. So we'll see the chat from each of the streams that we're broadcasting here today. And one question I have for the audience to get us started, if you don't mind, is just drop in the chat where in the world you're joining from today. What country or what city and what country are you in today? We have a global audience that typically attends these live streams, and today is no different. And today our guest, who I'm going to introduce here in just a moment, we are in extremely different time zones today. So many of you may be on similar time zones or somewhere in between. So love to hear what city or country you're joining from here today. Again, today's topic is lessons from complex digital transformations throughout the world. And joining me today is Dean Sam out of the Third Stage Consulting Asia Pacific office. Dean, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Eric. Nice to be here. It's been a while. I haven't done one of these live streams. I think the last one was over a year ago. So thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. It's been too long since you've been on. So it's good to have you back on. And I especially appreciate you being on here today at the time we're filming this discussion here. I'm on the East Coast of the United States and you're in Australia. So our time differences here cannot be much different. So I appreciate you being up in the middle of the night, your time, to have this conversation. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So just to get started, I guess it's you have a really interesting background and upbringing in the digital transformation space. Maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about who you are and how you what do you do, and we'll get into some of the how you got started in this world of digital transformation here in a minute. But maybe just tell us about yourself to get started.
Yeah. So how should I start? So, well, I'm originally from Canada. That's where I grew up. I graduated from university there, and I decided to right after graduation, I decided to move to Asia, basically, and I went to China because I wanted to learn Mandarin. I couldn't speak Mandarin before that. And because at the time China, or it still is, but at the time China was booming economically, and thinking maybe that's the new gold rush basically in the world, and a lot of young professionals were flooding there and hoping to start their career. So I went there without any expectations. I first wanted to learn the language. And then I got into, and then I started my career. I enjoyed China. I enjoyed Asia, what it had to offer. So I have a degree in engineering, mostly engineering, and so I worked in consulting. I also worked on the operational side, in the manufacturing industry. And while working in the manufacturing industry, I've led a few ERP implementations in the organization that was in. And notably, I led the ERP implementation in Bangladesh. So I actually lived and worked in Bangladesh for 7 years for several organizations. And Bangladesh being a developing country, that's where I got my feet wet in digital transformation, and most notably in ERP implementations. And I had to wear many hats being in Bangladesh, whether it was a project program manager, a project sponsor, a business analyst, whatsoever. So I've gone through the whole, I would say, digital enablement methodology in organization by building a strategy, by evaluating and selecting the right solution, negotiating with the vendors, preparing the organization, doing the change management, setting up the right processes, setting up the right people in the right roles in order to make technology work for those companies, implementing it, doing the go live, and so forth. And to be honest, I didn't have much support from seniors to tell me what to do or to guide me. I had to learn on the spot and on my own,
On the
really.
job
And
training.
yeah, on the job training, and that's how I got to meet you, really, Eric. And learning about your lessons learned, listening to your own podcasts. So it's quite surreal that I'm actually one of your guests now, many years later. And yeah, and your YouTube clips and so forth, and that gave me a number of pointers in certain areas of the digital transformation journey, and that helped me actually be successful in implementing those systems. And not to brag or anything, but it's just we've implemented several systems, whether it's a big one like an ERP or smaller bolt-on solutions, and those systems worked at the end of the day. And so I've built sort of I guess my methodology, my own process in getting these systems implemented, and 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 now I'm part of the third stage family, and trying to adopt those, that my experience in other organizations.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting background. I mean, you've got certainly the multinational component covered well. Canada, Hong Kong, China, Bangladesh. You're in Australia visiting one of our clients right now. You mentioned before we went live, so you definitely have that global footprint or that global experience base that is so rich with experience and lessons learned. So look forward to chatting through some of those lessons, and just to speaking of international, looking to our audience and where everyone's joining from today, just a few examples of where else in the world others are joining from. We have Dennis from Cochin, India, Ryan from Denver, Colorado, Dan from Naples, Florida, Megan from South Carolina, Prav from Austin, Steve from Los Angeles, Wendy from Mexico, someone from Rostock, Germany, someone from Biden, UK. So or Biden is from the UK, I should say. His name is Biden, and he's joining us from the UK. So a lot of global representation in terms of just a few examples there of where people are joining from. So thank you for being here. So you started to allude to this a little bit, Dean. You talked about your journey. Starting off younger, earlier in life in Canada, and then moving over to Asia, and having different experiences throughout Asia. What how did you how did you start to get involved in digital transformations? It sounds like maybe it was unplanned. It wasn't part of your master plan was to become a digital transformation consultant, or was it? Or how did you end up falling into this?
Well, first thing is I feel I have I guess a skill. If some people are good are better at some tasks or some activity than others. one area that I thought I sort of excelled at is organizing information,
Right.
basically. Actually, it started with my first experience, my first company where I worked in. It was a consulting firm. It was actually a procurement service provider back in Shanghai, and the partners of that company, they were seasoned consultants, and they were ex consultants from Accenture and Bain and Booz Allen and so forth, and they started this consulting firm, and I started out as just an intern, and then became an analyst and so forth. And so they had different they had a clear process in terms of how they roll out their methodology and their offerings, and they had a lot of tools, right, to support those offerings. And after a couple of years on the job, I went through the whole end-to-end process of what the company offers, and then I started organizing all their tools, standardizing, whatever it might be, their Excel tools or their emails, their PowerPoint reports and so forth. And then I embedded those into their process. So it was a clear cut kind of way of doing things, and it was very much standardized, and that was applied to all their offices globally. And that was 15 years ago, and I could say they're still following exactly that same standardized process and those standardized tools. So it's not related to actual implementing an actual technology, but it's just the fact of the ability to organize information in an efficient way, so others can use it, right? Can profit from it, and it makes their way of working much simpler. So that was a first successful step. I said, all right, so it looks like I'm good in putting information together. And then I moved into more in the manufacturing and operational role, and I implemented an ERP, JD Edwards, in a factory in Bangladesh. And and same kind of mindset. I was able to design, you can say, the right information structure in order to link, demand to material planning, to production planning, to production execution, and all the way down, up to inventory and shipping. Um, so that was a second, I guess, second experience that was fruitful, and got me into a role of a head of ERP implementation for another organization. And in that organization, the key thing was what I learned about, especially in the ERP space, because that's more my experience lies in there, is by achieving better planning for different organizations. And what we see in many of our clients, the type of planning they do is very reactive and short term, right? But if you want to implement a robust technology, you need to have a longer view of your business. So you need to have a longer planning horizon. And so setting up, whether it's you have a 2-week planning horizon, but you have to move up to a monthly and a quarterly, and the yearly planning, and that can be achieved through that new technology. But that requires a change in how the company thinks and how the company uses information in order to plan on the longer term basis.
Right. And in your description of your background, and that's really interesting, by the way, of how you ended up in this industry and in this role. I've yet to meet anyone that had a plan from childhood. They knew when they were a kid that they wanted to be a digital transformation or ERP consultant. I've yet to meet anyone that had that part of their master plan. It seems like we all sort of had detours and sort of fell into the space based on opportunity and growth. But you've worked with a lot of different organizations ranging in size from small to mid-sized companies to large multinational organizations. Both as a consultant, but also earlier in your career before you became a consultant, you were working for some larger organizations. When you think about larger or more complex organizations, whether it's complex because it's multinational or complex because of its size or because of the scope of what the business does, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned over the years as it relates to managing change and managing transformation in these more complex organizations? What are some of the nuances that you've learned over the years?
Well, I'm basing myself on the experience that I've gotten and what I see works. When we're talking about global multinational organizations with offices around the globe or manufacturing sites across the globe, I think one key foundational piece is to have more of a centralized control of your digital team, right? Instead of having too much of a decentralized kind of IT or ERP teams across different sites. It needs to be centralized. I believe so. So one of the companies that I worked in, they had a large business analyst, ERP business analyst team in their head office, and whether they would roll out a system in another site in another country, or is it because of a mergers and acquisition activity? So they had to roll out their system in that other entity. It always was done from a centralized ERP team, because and then from there, when you have that, then your master data is also run by a centralized group, right? So consistency of data, the data sets that are being deployed, the attributes that are being deployed, the data structures are all consistent across the global company. And thirdly, once you have consistent data, you can have consistent planning processes running through it. So you can have, let's say, the mother office or the central office, the central planning office can run SNOP at a global level, right? And then you could have regional planning office that would take that SNOP output and then drive the master production scheduling. And then you had more on the site level that could drive MRP and shop floor control. And then the regional, you can either do it at the site. Distribution planning, you could either do it at the site or at the regional level, depending on what you'd like to do. So looking at those planning levels, you could achieve those planning levels even for complex and global organizations if your data system basically is being there's some oversight. There's oversight from a central point of view.
Yeah, and it's interesting hearing you say that. I agree with everything you just said. I think that centralization and having that consistency of processes and focus on data management, things like that, everything you just described is very important, especially for larger, more complex multinational organizations. However, it also runs counter to some of the conventional wisdom or some of the emerging thinking in the market, which is we should do more agile sorts of implementations. We should be more decentralized. We should have flat organizations, and so there's some sort of business trends or movements the opposite direction of what you're describing. How do you reconcile that? I mean, do you see that sort of a conflict between conventional thinking or emerging thinking and how things should be versus the way things actually work and are most effective? Or what are your thoughts?
I sort of how can I say, put aside that kind of those buzzwords in terms of how to deploy technology, like agile or lean uh, or whatnot. You know what? I just first is set up your design, and your design
Right.
needs to be clear end to end. And it's not about just having a overall 2B process design, but it's looking at the actual data sets that sit under those processes, sit under those activities, making sure your data set is standardized, is robust, meaning it's robust, it can meet all the possible business scenarios that your company has to go through, whether it's uh, selling an item, the different type of sales scenarios that can go through, whether the different making sure it goes through the let's say the supply chain. So all the scenarios. So you have to cover all of that, and that has to be put on paper first. And you have to cover the whole gamut of business scenarios, and making sure your data structure can support that. And if it cannot support that, then you revise your data structure. You have to add a field, because you have to meet a certain scenario. So that's how you have to build it. And from my experience, if you don't do that readiness, right, you're not going to get the full functionality of the system. Because if you didn't lay out all the scenarios and the data sets that support it, then you cannot connect the dots in terms of how you can build automation through the solution, because you don't have your data set isn't robust enough to do so.
Right. Yeah, that's well said. And I think you use the word setting aside buzzwords and trends. I think that's a really important point
Yeah.
because there's certain trends and buzzwords that may apply to you as an organization, and there's many that won't. And so you have to really see past that and your business and what you're trying to accomplish.
I look at the agile kind of way of doing things. That could work if you're developing apps, right?
Right.
You're developing certain programs, but in our case, we're not developing programs for the sake of ease of messaging or shopping or whatever. It's actually, we have to run an organization. So you have to know
Right.
your organization's requirements
Right.
before. So you can't really go agile unless you have defined all your organization's requirements. Or else what can happen is actually the new system that's coming in might be even worse than the system that the organization currently has, and then,
Right.
and therefore where's your value after that? So
Yeah.
the agile, I'm not a big fan.
You and I share that common that commonality for sure, among other things. But I'd be curious to hear from the audience. What do you think of Agile, especially in complex, multinational, complex organizations? Do you think Agile has a role? Do you think is it overrated? Is it something that has practical use? I'd love to hear the audience's comments here too, as we're chatting through it. And that's usually a controversial topic, so I like to ask it whenever we
Yeah.
can. So love to hear the audience's thoughts here too. So another thing that you and I share, in addition to our skepticism of Agile, Dean, is that we also have I'd say we both have a shared skepticism for general tech trends and general. You mentioned buzzwords, but just talking about technical trends, and tell me a little bit about your thoughts of trends in the marketplace in terms of technology trends, and sort of how it fits into the realities of what organizations should be doing in their digital transformations.
Well, in order to become more optimal in how to plan and manage a business, I don't think adding new trendy technology is the way to go. It's about, in order for technology to work, because technology is only good if it works, right? So you have to look internally in the organization. Where is the organization at in terms of their digital mindset? Uh, and is that digital mindset available across across the company, top down, right? And what I focus on is enabling that digital mindset in the organization. So can companies or anyone or key people in the organization, can they take a process that the company is currently using or it's part of their working process? Can they translate that on pen and paper in terms of data structure and data flow? If the company can achieve that, then we're able to implement new technologies, first of all. Because if it doesn't work on pen and paper, and it's not robust enough, and it doesn't meet the end-to-end process, then you have a problem, because it won't work. It won't work when you're implementing a solution or a program. So when we're talking about agile and all that earlier, how I approach implementing a solution is really, it's like I take an engineering point of view. It's like building a bridge, right? You're not gonna go on and agilely build a bridge, right? You gotta build your blueprint. You gotta make sure your blueprint meets all the environmental conditions. You have to do force testing across every part of the bridge, make sure it can support the load that's required. And to do that, you got to do that on pen and paper first, and get agreement across the organization that that's the best way to go. And that's part of the readiness piece that we often do with our clients before they actually invite or ask the solution integrator to come in and start rolling out the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at, you mentioned, for example, that you've been implementing technology for a long time. You talked about JD Edwards, and you've seen the evolution of technology over the years and some of the changes in technology. And I think that what's interesting is how fast technology changes and how much growth has happened in the technology space. But at the same time, organizations and their ability to change hasn't really kept up. So in other words, you have a company, if you're a company that you have enough trouble just implementing a basic GL system or a basic inventory management system, it's not going to do you any good to now try to pile on a bunch of other new technologies on top of that when you can't even get the basic fundamentals implemented well. So it's sort of like you have to learn to walk before you run with a lot of these tech trends.
Yeah, it's like playing any sport, right? Let's take tennis, for example. The new system or the new technology could be a new racket, right? Or another bolt-on that you like to add, or another add-on. Those are your tennis shoes. But if the player isn't ready for the match, and he's not in good shape, his footwork is weak, his technique is weak, his serve is weak, what's the point? What's the point in buying all that equipment if you can't use it? And that's really the analogy that I have with technology and organization is focus on the player, right? Focus on the player. Do you have the right fitness level? Do you have the right technique? Do you have the right mentality to play a tennis match and to go through the grind and all that? We focus on that. And then once the player is strong enough, regardless of what technology you choose, the player will adapt to it.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, great analogy.
If I buy racket brand A or racket brand B, but I'm a solid tennis player, I'll still do well on the tennis court.
Right. No, that's a great point. And the focus becomes on becoming a great tennis player versus, which racket am I going to use or which ball do I prefer and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's an interesting question from Irina on YouTube. And the question that Irina has is, how do you build teams for a new ERP implementation? So you've been involved with a lot of our clients in helping them do this and helping them through the implementations. But what advice do you give to an organization that's trying to build their internal digital mindset, as you mentioned before, but also, how do they structure that team, or what are some tips to structure that team to help them through the transformation?
Um, if I had to choose one role that I feel it's critical in order for organizations to really take ownership and to how to say, to be in control of their digital transformation journey, is the role of a business analyst, internal business analyst, not outside business analysts like consultants coming in, but organizations, business analysts who, number one, they need to understand business management best practices, right? Because best practices for me, it's a good starting point, because already that sets the right foundation in terms of what information you require in order to run a process, or how information should be structured. Take, for example, like in a manufacturing organization, we talk a lot about bill of materials, MRP, inventory. So that's to achieve MRP. So those best practices of having proper inventory control and adequate bill of materials, those are certain best practice that needs to the business analyst should know about, first of all. And then the business analysts should be able to design really new processes, right? Improve to-be processes, and also design data structures, improve your data structure to meet those those different business processes. So because they're the ones who are the ones who are going to connect between, let's say, your system integrator and the organization. And because during the implementation, you want to, of course, the employees in the organizations, they will be involved. They'll have key roles as super users or process leads and whatnot. But you don't want to take too much of their time. Let the business analysts take the load in the implementation to be the facilitator between the business members and the consultants. And the business analysts will be the ones during implementation who would develop the processes. So you're not wasting. So you're not spending too much money for the SIs to do that. Number one. Number two is for all the data cleansing, the testing, and then troubleshooting. You have that layer of business analysts to support the business team.
Right. No, it's good advice, and it's a good way to think about building these competencies internally. You certainly want to leverage outside consulting help and that outside experience that you don't have, but you also don't want to be so dependent on outside consultants that you sort of create that learned helplessness. You want to be able to start to build that competency in house so that you can own this longer term.
Right, and they will get the full on knowledge transfer from the SIs on the actual back end of the solution. So if we are to improve certain configurations that's required in the system, or actually build certain customization because for certain areas, or to build APIs and connect other solutions, they will have that knowledge to do so. So you don't need to always ask for outside consultants to do that work. So you've built that internal capable team to support the business moving forward.
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. Here's an interesting comment from Megan on LinkedIn. Megan says, as a new digital transformation consultant, these analogies and examples are so helpful. So I'm glad this is helping you, Megan, and hopefully it's helping other people listening in as well. Here's an interesting question from Ryan on LinkedIn. I'll see if I can show the entire comment. It'll hide our faces for a moment, but we can see it here. Ryan says, how do you resolve issues where the executive team is forcing a system that may not be the right fit for a company, especially when the rest of the company sees the issues and voices their concern ahead of time? And maybe I'll broaden that question a little bit to say, what are some tips you would have for companies to overcome resistance to change in general, whether it's because they don't like the new system that's being deployed, or maybe there's just certain parts of it they don't like, or challenges they see in the changes that are going to be driven through the organization. How do you deal with that, or what are some advice you give?
Well, when we talk about the executive team, we need to often we shouldn't focus too much. We should articulate this technology problem in a way that the executive team, the general public can understand. And when we work with executives and when we to choose the right solution or to change a solution, often part of our methodology at Third Stage APAC is to first is to understand what the executives team wants out of the business, what they want to do, basically, whether it's with technology or without technology, what they want to do in the future. So what are their requirements, what they want to control, what do they want to manage? And then we build what we call functional architecture. And the functional architecture are basically based on their requirements. What are the modules and high level functionalities that the new technology should have, right? So you have so the functional architecture is how you articulate business requirements and technology. It's that middle ground. It's that binding point. Okay. And then from there, once everyone agrees on this is the functional architecture that we need, so that becomes your shopping list, basically, right? It's your shopping list. I need my butter. I need my milk. I need my cereal. But then you go to then when you start looking at what's available in the market, then you look at the different brands. So you have you can choose from different brands to meet the items of your shopping list, and then you start evaluating which brand or which system brand best meets that functional architecture or that area of that functional architecture, that module, and so forth. So, and then that's where you can create alignment across the organization, because first the organization sees, okay, we're working on the same song sheet, which is the functional architecture. Then we can start evaluating which solution is best meets that functional architecture.
Right. So it's sort of getting the buy or the input and involvement from the team in creating that future state, or that functional architecture of what the future is going to look like, and that's one way to overcome that resistance, and also to make sure that you choose the right system that best fits the organization and what the needs are.
Yeah. And the functional architecture, I think that's an extremely important exercise before actually even meeting or talking to salespeople for any solution, because that sets, again, like I was saying, that sets your shopping list, and you're making sure that you're not buying too much,
Right.
or not enough. But usually, oftentimes, companies buy too much, and when it's time to implement, we weren't ready for it. We didn't, or they question, why did we buy this in the first
Right.
place, and that falls on the wayside, and it's not being and it's not being used.
Yeah, taking your analogy one step further, your shopping list analogy. If you create your shopping list while you're starving, you haven't eaten all day. You create your shopping list, you're probably going to over purchase. You're going to buy more than you need because you're just hungry, and it turns out maybe you can't eat all that stuff that you buy. And it's the same sort of thing with technology too.
So create a shopping list that satisfies your needs first, right? Not just pile on what would you like to have.
Right. Yeah, exactly. What about when defining a digital strategy? Here's a question from Kyler as it relates to digital strategy. But what are your thoughts on customization in your digital strategy? Can you over customize? And I'm not sure if she means the strategy, customizing the strategy itself, or customizing technology within that strategy. So I'm not 100% clear on which angle. But what is sort of your knee-jerk reaction to that, or what are your thoughts?
Well, if it's customizing digital strategy, of course, the digital strategy has to be developed as per the organizational needs and what the executives require. In terms of customizing technology, usually customizing will have your end-to-end design data structure, and then you have to customize it. You have to build a source or certain script to add on more information, so can be rolled. Ideally, in order to avoid, that's the plan, is again to have that full data structure. And it's just a bit just a table with rows. You're not limited how many fields you want. At the end of the day, it can be as big as you want to meet the needs of the business. So if you set that up properly and you have that robust data structure from the get-go, your level of customization will diminish. So that's where and that's where you leverage the configuration of the solution.
Right. Now there's actually a few questions we're getting here that are more, I'd say, career related questions, but so I'll pick one here that I think is maybe a good broad overview here. But this is from Aditola on LinkedIn, and Aditola asked the question: how does one begin a career in digital transformation? What are your thoughts, or what advice would you give to someone who is just getting started in digital transformation or would like to be a consultant? What advice would you offer?
My advice is to have actual operational experience in an organization, not necessarily that's a track that I took, and that helped me. Before going into a consultancy, it's good that you have experience in actually using a digital solution or business management solution, whether you're in sales, working, or in marketing, working on the CRM. So learn that CRM in the ins and out, and see what's available, and improve how your organization is using that system and leveraging it to the maximum, and improving the processes, improving the data structure that sits under that in your organization. So that's one avenue. Okay, so become a specialist in the system that your company is currently using. Number two is, if you're in your company, there is an opportunity to be part of a project team to implement a new solution. Jump on that right away. Apply for that role. Okay, because you're going to get practical experience in implementing a solution. And so if you have one or both of those experiences, then I feel you have a strong track record to get into consultancy, because then you become a credible consultant in front of potential clients, because you've gone through the trenches in using solutions and improving them, or even implementing solutions.
Right. Yeah, that's great advice. Let's see. There's another question I want to get to here. So, what are some of the biggest, maybe just at a high level? We could have spent the whole hour talking about this one question, so we'll try to maybe summarize what we might have covered in more detail. But how would you summarize some of the biggest challenges that our clients struggle with when they're going through digital transformations, whether they're big, complex organizations, or a smaller, mid-sized company that's less complex? What are some of those major pitfalls or challenges that you see clients struggle with?
I would say, I guess prior to implementation of a solution, there's this readiness phase that we suggest that the companies go through before bringing in, consultants from the system integrator, and they start, mapping out your business and seeing and implementing the solution based on that mapping, because oftentimes that mapping is often based on the as is of the solution, because you don't consultants who are implementing solutions, they don't have time, and I understand them, because their job is to implement solution at customer sites, is to develop a new structure, a new way of thinking, or new way of operating for the uh, for the uh, for the client. And oftentimes it's taking what you have in current data sets, what you have in current processes, and make that happen in that new technology. So a thorough readiness stage for change management, and for to be process design, and to be data structure, I believe is critical, because we were talking about planning earlier, right? We want to improve. We want to have better planning across the organization, from long term to short term. Yes, the system will help you plan, but you need to have good planners in the company, right? And what we see, maybe the planners are not at that moment, when the planners in organizations that we work, maybe they're not up to the mark. So you need to upgrade their skill set, right? Um, or you need to find more experienced planners too. So because they understand the role of information, and having information coming in, so and then lay out what type of information they need to be shown on their interface, so they can make the best informed decisions. So it's developing that digital and also that planning mindset before going into implementation. So that readiness phase is critical.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. And maybe, you may have a similar answer for my last question I have for you here today, Dean. It's somewhat related to what I just asked you, but I'll ask it maybe a little bit different to see, if it stimulates any other thoughts. But what closing advice would you leave with someone, an organization or a team that's about to begin their digital transformation journey? What are some of those tips that you would say, do these 2 or 3 things to get started?
Um, 2 to 3 things to get started. Mm, Well, you need to have. Well, first of all, your executive team needs to be on board, right? If they're in the bleachers, and just looking at the match in front of them, and not being involved, then you've got a problem, right? But if the executive team is taking ownership, they're taking leadership, they want to get involved, they want to know what's happening, that's already a first sign. So that executive buy-in, but also active participation is very important. um, and number two is, make sure you have your business analysts in place. And how you structure your business analysts, usually you have, you can break down the organization in key functional departments or functional processes, whether it's finance and costing, manufacturing, supply chain, demand planning. So you have business analysts that are covering those key elements of the organizations, and they're building the processes and the data structure for those for those parts of the business. And then when it's comes to do the planning, because that's where demand planning needs to connect with material planning. So you've set up those processes in those separate areas, and then planning is really where it's the meeting of the minds, right? It's the meeting of the information. So So that's the beauty of information design. So how do we put demand planning and material planning together, and then you develop your planning structure? So you need to have those business analysts sitting. You need to have enough business analysts covering the whole spectrum of the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes total sense. Those are good ideas or good tidbits and tips to get started on a transformation.
Yeah, very simple. I in my view, it's it's a tennis player, right? if
Right.
if you don't train hard enough and you're not practicing enough, you're not going to get ready for the match. You're not going to get ready. You're not going to be ready for the tournament. And it's there's no silver bullet. There's and that magical racket is not going to make you win the match or not. It's definitely not going to make you win the tournament. So you got to work on yourself. You got to work on your and building your skills, your own skill set.
Yeah. Building your skill set and having a plan, a training plan, and a
Yeah.
vision for what it is you're trying to accomplish and all that good stuff. Um, so good. Well, I appreciate all the great advice and tips you've shared here today, Dean. And I think a lot of these tips and talking points we've talked through here today are relevant for complex organizations, larger organizations, but also just any organization that's going through change. Hopefully, this has provided some guidance and things to think about as you're going through transformation. Um, so maybe just to close, then, in closing, just tell us a little bit about you're part of Third Stage Consulting Asia Pacific. So you work with a lot of our clients there in the Asia Pacific region. You also work with Wayne Holtham, who Wayne's been on the show as well, and he's been in many of our videos and YouTube channel content and whatnot. How can people connect with you and learn more about Third Stage Consulting Asia Pacific, or and I'll talk about how they can learn about Third Stage in general, but how can they learn more about you and about Third Stage APAC?
Well, if any of you are thinking or planning a digital transformation initiative, looking at other solutions, we'd be happy to have a chat and to hear what you're going through. And you can contact me over email. I think that's the best way. It's dean.sam@thirdstage-consulting.com. Myself and my partner Wayne, who is based out of Australia, will be happy to speak to you and hear what you're going through. And there's no commitment whatsoever. We'll be happy to just have a call, and hopefully we can get to know your business, and we can maybe guide you in the right direction, depending on where you are on your journey.
Yep, sounds great. Well, appreciate having you on the show here today, from all the way from Australia via Hong Kong, via Bangladesh and Canada, and some of the other places you've worked over the years. So thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it, Dean. Great having you on the show. And we'll have to make sure not to wait a year before the next time you're back on. We'll have to do it a little bit sooner than that, won't we?
All right, I'll wait for your next invite.
All right, sounds good. Well, I love having you on here as always, and thank you for being here, especially late at night. Thank you to the audience for all the great questions that you all had. Appreciate it. Again, this conversation will get edited and combined with other content to become part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast episode that gets released a week from tomorrow. So you can check out new episodes of Transformation Ground Control every Wednesday. It streams to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as drops on audio podcast platforms like Google Podcast, Amazon Podcast, Apple Podcast, etc. So be sure to check it out there if you don't already. Thank you again for being here. We do this live stream, same time, same place, same format every week, different guests every week. So be sure to check us out next week as well. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next week on our next episode of the Digital Transformation live stream. So thank you very much in the meantime, and have a great week.
Thank you, everyone.